Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
I really thought about starting this one with Welcome to the Benny Cool Dick Hour.
Welcome to the
Benny
Cool Dick Variety Hour.
I love that idea. If it had only come along before we had
still
180 episodes.
Yeah. We're really far into this shit, and we're not contractually obligated. The Benny Cool Dick Hour could be coming.
It's just completely changed the format. It's the Benny Cool Dick Hour, but it's now like a cooking podcast, which is like the worst kind of podcast because cooking like in shows really lend themselves to visual media.
Now just imagine a t-shirt saying the Benny Cool Dick Hour is coming, and it's the most sex pest fucking t-shirt that will ever be. So yeah, I'm not Benny Cool Dick legally yet. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
But this is the Non-Essential Podcast. We took a week off.
Sorry about that. I'm sure you missed us.
Yeah.
I really was going to just go find like one of our real good episodes and just like kind of repost it and do like not best of, because best of is like where you cut up multiple episodes, but just like repost a classic, like
just a reminder.
Classic Non-Essential. Problem is, we don't have any good episodes. They're all bad.
Well, no, the thing is, you could probably like retweet a link to a past episode and just say it's new, and no one will call us on it because no one cares. So,
good point. Yeah. No, we really do have. It's just I got too busy to go pick one, but I think some of our, especially like our first. In that like first group of like maybe 30 shows, a lot of people that do listen to the show probably didn't hear. They probably didn't yet. And I think we had some really good shows in there. Yeah. So next time we take a week off, I might throw something up just for that. But we thought a week off would be great. We all need a week off.
I didn't get, I just had a lot of scheduling shit come up, and it was like, I know we could have probably figured out a way to work around it, but I was just like, you know what? I haven't called off for no reason in a while. Let's just do that. And if you thought taking a week off would recharge my batteries and I'd have a fresh, fun topic for you, it's like you've never listened to the show at all. Because I still didn't have time or energy.
Well, that's what jeez, now I'm dying. A real good night tonight vocally for me. It's flimmy and just feel like I've got a weak voice.
It's called authenticity.
Yeah.
We got cigar breath and choking down cognac.
That's what kills me when people are like, oh man, you need to take a vacation from work or recharge those batteries. I'm like, that doesn't fucking work. It's nice while you're off, but then you get back and
makes me
realize
resentful.
Right. You just hate going to work twice as much because you know what you could be doing instead.
I did a health assessment at work. Because here's a weird thing about me. I have not been to the doctor in maybe 8 or 9 years. Something like that. And when I went, it was just like hey, you need to drink more water, like urgent care type thing. So I haven't I don't know my blood pressure. I don't know my glucoses, all this shit. And at work they did they offered like a free screening, because it's all tied to the insurance, and they want to know if you're going to be expensive, presumably, right. So they can fire you before you are.
Don't you love that they like present it like, oh, free health screening, you should do it for health. Yeah. It's like you're doing it for your insurance costs, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, if you did it, your premium supposedly automatically went down. I did it because they offered a free $100 gift card, and I was curious because, like I said, it had been forever. And my glucoses and cholesterol were all good, which surprised me because I eat like a fucking monster.
And some of those energy drink. What was it? The
Monsters. Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
Yeah. I drink one of those a day at least. But that's so I was good in everything, and then when she did my blood pressure. The first 2 times she did it, she was like, these are at stroke levels. So I'm like, wow, I'm having a stroke as we speak.
You're like, what a coincidence. I had a stroke right before I came to work.
Yeah.
Wink.
And then so she did it on my left arm, and then she did it on my right arm the third try, and then it was just kind of high. and which was funny
so
to me. So it's
left arm.
Yeah.
It's your stroke arm.
Yeah, I'm having a stroke on my left side, but my right side's just a little fucked up and tense.
There's our next t-shirt. We always talk about t-shirts for our merch store, and I want a t-shirt that just says my left arm is my stroke arm. Yeah. Because that's just, it goes right along with the Vinny
God,
Cool
I wish I thought of that at the moment. I was like, yeah, that's my stroke hand. Oh, that's brilliant. Fuck. But yeah, I thought that was really funny, just like how fucking unhealthy I am. That like half of me is dying as we speak.
Yeah, but only half. That's what I like.
Yeah. So that was fun, and it made me nervous. But anyway, the whole point of that is I am trying to like take care of myself a little bit and not stress myself out as much and try to eat better. Not great at it, but I'm eating a lot of like fake vegetarian chicken now. I'm the furthest thing from a vegetarian, but I'm usually okay with like fake chicken patties. So,
well, it's one of those things where, I'm definitely not a vegetarian either, but I can have meals that are like, I've even gone like a week where like all my dinners are just like vegetable based, no meat. And it's like one of those things, people that do eat meat get really weird with it. Like, you have to have meat always, meat. Yeah. It has to be meat. And it's like, you really do feel good. I'm not saying you should go 100% vegetarian forever unless, if you want to, great. But I think what you find out is most of us are not getting nearly enough vegetables in our diet. Yeah. Says the guy who ordered pizza and fried onion petals.
Well, and I think dinner. There's a lot of that shit where it's like, no, it does not taste like a real, like, Italian sausage, but it doesn't taste bad. And if you know how to prepare your fucking meal right, you're not just eating it on its own anyway. So it's like, yeah, it's maybe not what I would want it to taste like at a restaurant, but for my lazy ass, it's just as good as any other dinner.
Well, and here's the other thing. I think sometimes we try too hard to make vegetarian meals that mimic meat meals. And like you said, you can do it, and some of them can be okay. But if you're still picturing in your head meat, you're probably always going to be disappointed. But there's a lot of meals you can make that are like all vegetable, like Indian cooking, for instance. I like a lot of like the curries and that kind of stuff, but and I'm really, really terrible with the names of their dishes. But a lot of their dishes just naturally, they don't have meat in them. They might have like chickpeas and squash or whatever, and so you're not trying to mimic meat. It's just a meal that happens to be vegetables, and some of those are very good.
Like I can't do a broad generalization, but I do think like in some ways I actually prefer like fake chicken stuff. Because
you don't get gristle and shit.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Like if I get a beak in my fake chicken, I'm going to be pissed. I'm pissed anyway, but at least like here, it's almost never going to happen. Man, imagine like being that guy. You're just pissed off at the factory line. Start throwing chicken parts and fake chicken meals.
The best part is that implies that you walk around with chicken parts in your pockets.
Yeah, like you're a Batman villain at that point. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I brought a story this week. It's from a user named Math Kid, and it's called Wet Straw. It began some months after his wife died. He had moved into a boarding house. There he lived a sheltered life. Sale of her bonds had provided money. A book a day, concerts, solitary meals, visits to the museum, these sufficed. He listened to his radio and napped and thought a good deal. Life was good enough. Which is like already, that's a really weird response to your wife being dead. I don't know, like maybe it's just me, but I feel like you should be miserable forever. Like that's that's how I always imagined, like if I was a widower, it going. Where I wouldn't be like, good enough.
But I suppose like it would lessen the sting if you just were left with enough money to be like, now I'm just one of those like we talked about, I think a few episodes back, like the Warcraft kids that like are just living off of some trust, and you never have to leave your basement if you don't want to.
See, I just like, he says he goes to concerts. I feel I'd be so self-conscious that like, if I was that old dude at a concert, I would assume people were thinking he must have killed his wife. Why else can he be
I
out
always
here?
assume when I see an old guy at like a concert or even like at a bar show, but as an old guy that's there by himself, I automatically jump straight to like pedophile. Like he's there to try to pick up the youngest people in the place. Yeah. And I don't know. I say I do know why, because 99% of the time I think that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
Totally.
No, this is way off topic, but I remember a couple of years ago, the little like village, town, city, whatever that my parents live in, it's just kind of up the road from us here, but they always do like these like jazz and rib fest, where they like shut down Main Street and set up rides and food trucks and whatnot, whatever. And so we went to one, and they had the stage set up that like these dance troupes, like if like the dance classes you can put your kids in if you're insane, were performing on, and it's these girls that are like 8 to 12 years old wearing next to nothing, dancing to like songs that are 1,000% about sex. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, that seems inappropriate. And then at the back of the audience, there's just like 2 or 3 guys like with sunglasses and ball caps pulled down, like just like watching the show by themselves. This is my shit. Like, yeah. And you're like, yeah, I'm very uncomfortable from both sides of this thing. I'm going to go get some ribs and beer. Bye.
That is a good point. Because I think if you look at a lot of cultures, just throughout the history of mankind, a lot of dancing was sexualized. So it is very weird when it's like, when those moves are being applied to children, and there's like full-grown men judging the moves.
Yeah. Judging's one word to use. I have other words.
I imagine, they have a criteria, which I think is creepier, actually, if they're like reviewing it. It's like a third. It's like a 45-year-old man reviewing the Twilight movies. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? It's not for you, you weirdo.
A 45-year-old man reviewing the Twilight movies that doesn't get paid to do it. Like, I get it if you're a movie critic and you like just have to, but yeah. Anyway,
that was old man hanging out. His wife's dead.
Concert. Yeah.
I assume he's old.
Yeah, I mean, you could be a like 23-year-old widower, but
he's living a pretty mellow life for a 25-year-old widower.
Yeah, I'm picturing at least like 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
Probably 60s.
89 years old.
Yeah.
One night he put down his book and undressed. Okay, he's reading, so 95 years old.
Yes.
And undressed. He turned out the lights and opened the windows. He sat down on the bed and stared a moment at the floor. His eyes ached a little. Then he lay down and put his arms behind his head. There was a cold draft from the window, so he pulled the covers over his head and closed his eyes. It was very still. He could hear his own regular breathing. The warmth began to cover him. The heat fondled his body and soothed it. He sighed heavily and smiled. I do that a lot, and I think you and me have talked about it, where it's like we're both kind of like, we can sleep with like a pillow over our head, just completely covered.
Yep.
But I've never wanted to be fondled by the heat.
I'm fondled by my own breath. Yeah.
That's gross.
No, I'm weirder than that. I can sleep with a pillow over my head, and up until recently, I quit doing that because now I sleep with earbuds in, and that kind of half of the pillow thing for me is drowning out noise, so the earbuds also accomplish that. But I can't sleep covered up by covers. Like, I'm on top of the cover. It could be like dead of winter with the window open, and I'm probably still going to be on top of the covers.
Those few times I lost power a couple of years ago, or a year or two ago. I don't remember when it was. I think it was just a year. Anyway, like, that was the only time I had to pull the cover over my head because it was so fucking
cold.
I
think you would have literally died if you did, if you didn't.
Yeah, it was, I think the high was like 13 degrees then. So
yeah.
In an instant, his eyes were open. There was a thin breeze stroking his cheek, and he could smell something like wet straw. It was not to be mistaken. Reaching out, he could touch the wall and feel the breeze from the window. Yet, under the covers, where there had been only warmth there, was another breeze, and a damp, chilling smell of wet straw. He threw the covers from him and lay on the bed, breathing harshly. Then he laughed in his mind. A dream? A nightmare? Too much reading. Bad food. That's how I always react to anything. Bad food. Bad food. Out of my way, I've had bad food.
I'm picturing watching TV with Tara and her turning around and screaming, "The kitchen's on fire." I'm like, it's probably bad food.
He pulled up the covers and closed his eyes. He kept his head outside the blankets and slept. The next morning, he forgot about it. He had breakfast and went to the museum. There he spent the morning. He visited all the rooms and looked at everything. When he was about to leave, he felt a desire to go back and look at a painting he had only glanced at before. It's amazing that you would even, if your plan is to spend the entire day at the museum, why would you take a glance at anything? Because look at anything as long as you want.
But you get to the museum and realize you made a terrible fucking mistake because you're like, this stuff's boring. Well, I'm just going to breeze through.
Half the paintings there, the interesting shit is the stuff the painter covered over. Like I was watching a YouTube video about this painting that showed up on the Andy Griffith show and was used as a prop in a lot of things. And it's these like two potato farmers standing over a basket of potatoes, and somebody x-rayed the painting and realized that they were burying a little coffin originally, and the painter covered it up, which is like really morbid and fucking crazy.
Yeah. That's how I know I've become an adult. It's like, because sometimes it's easy to be an adult and still feel like you're not. But at some point, I became that person that does go to like even an art museum and like want to actually like read the plaques and like learn about the painting and like look at the painting. Like Tara gets so frustrated, I think, because she still likes to just like look at it and be like, yeah, that's neat.
It's just a visual. Huh. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I want to know the history behind it.
I want to know when that dude died. I want to know about the 12 fucked up paintings he made afterwards because he was sexless and like pissed off. And
how many victims did they find in his basement afterwards? You know, I need.
Damn it, I want to know. And it's like a picture of a Care Bear.
Well, then you know the.
Then you know he was up to shit. Yeah. He stopped in front of it. It was a painting of a countryside. There was a big barn down in the valley, so a Bob Ross painting. Mm. He began to breathe heavily, and his fingers played on his tie. How ridiculous, he thought after a moment, that such a thing should make him nervous. He turned away. At the door, he looked back at the painting. The barn had frightened him. Only a barn, he thought. A barn and a painting. After dinner, he returned to his room. As soon as he opened the door, he remembered the dream. He went to the bed. He drew up the blankets and the sheets and shook them. There was no smell of wet straw. He felt like a fool. That night, when he went to bed, he left the window closed. He turned out the lights and got in bed and pulled the covers over his head. Well, there's the problem. Like, you're probably just pissing your pants, and it smells like straw.
Yeah, because that's what straw kind of absorbs the animal urine and stuff. So pissing your bed.
I'm saying he's shoving straw in his pants.
And then peeing on it.
Yeah, but before, don't you do that before you go to bed?
Well, I mean, it's better than not shoving straw in there and peeing. I mean,
doesn't that sound like the worst, actually? Just acupuncture for your ball sack. At first it was the same, silent and breathless and the creeping warmth. Then the breeze began again, and he distinctly felt his hair ruffled by it. He could smell wet straw. He stared into the blackness and breathed through his mouth so he wouldn't have to smell the straw. Somewhere in the dark, he saw a square of grayish light. It's a window, he thought, suddenly. He looked longer, and his heart jumped as a sudden flash of light showed in through the window. It was like lightning. He listened. He smelled the wet straw. He heard it starting to rain. He became frightened and pulled the covers off his head. The warm room was around him. It was not raining. It was oppressively hot because the window was closed. He stared at the ceiling and wondered why he was having this illusion. Again, he pulled up the blanket to make sure.
Asphyxiation, obviously.
Yeah. Because you were going for a high that could never be recreated. Again, he pulled up the blanket to make sure. He lay still and kept his eyes tightly closed. The smell was in his nostrils again. The rain was beating violently on the window. He opened his eyes and watched it and made out sheets of rain in the flashes. Then rain began to beat above him too, on a wooden roof. He was in some place with a wooden roof and wet straw. He was in a barn. That was why the picture had frightened him, but why frightened? He tried to touch the windows, but he couldn't reach it. The breeze blew on his hand and arm. He wanted to touch the window, but maybe he delighted in the thought, maybe open it and stick his head out in the rain, and then pull down the covers quickly to see if his hair was wet. So this dude
That's pretty smart, yeah.
Yeah, like, this is already a tough plot, because you're trying to make a fucking farm scary, and the only thing scary about farms is how hard you have to work. But if I don't work there, I don't give a shit.
I was just thinking, because we were just talking about like having, not sleeping under the covers, and I like having the windows open when you can, and part of that's like all of this sounds like I would just like. Now, if this was really happening, like you're going under the covers and all this shit was happening, you probably should be concerned. I would just be like, this is fucking perfect. And I'd sleep so soundly.
I'm dreaming very vividly, and this is nice.
Rain and thunderstorms and breezes.
Wet straw does smell kind of gross.
Yeah, but I grew up out in the country. It doesn't bother me. Yeah. It's just a smell.
I didn't really grow up in it, but the town I was born in, you could always, as soon as you got into town, you picked up on it. Yeah. He began to sense himself surrounded by space. There was no feeling of confinement in the bed. He felt the mattress, yet it was as though he lay on it in an open place. The breeze blew over his entire body, and the smell was more pronounced. He listened. He heard a squeak, and then a horse whinnying. He listened to it a while longer. Then he realized he couldn't feel the whole mattress. It felt as though he were lying on a cold wooden floor from his waist down. He reached out his hands in alarm and felt the edge of the blankets. He pulled them down. He was covered with sweat and his pajamas stuck to his body, which wouldn't be crazy for me. I sweat like all the fucking time.
God, yeah.
He got out of bed and turned on the light. A refreshing breeze came through the window when he opened it. His legs shook as he walked, and he had to grab at the dresser to keep from falling. In the mirror, he saw his face pale with fear. He held up his hand and watched it shake. His throat was dry. He went to the bathroom and got a drink of water. Then he went to the room and looked down at his bed. Nothing there but the tangled blanket and sheets and the stain where... That's gross. Don't bring that up. No. And the stain where he almost shit. And the stain where he had perspired. He held up the blanket and the sheets. He shook them before the light and examined them minutely. There was nothing. He took up a book and read for the rest of the night.
It seems like the obvious solution is to just go to sleep without the covers.
The obvious solution is to go to a barn, rent out a barn, and live there for now.
Or maybe that's how it works. Like if you fall asleep in your bed under the covers, you end up in a barn. If you fall asleep in a barn under the covers, you end up in your bed. So
yeah. Maybe this is all saying get back to your roots, son.
This is really just the backstory for Stardew Valley.
That guy, I always like the theory in that game that you're dead. And that's your afterlife. It's this happy town where you gotta build up a piece of shit farm. Or if you're like me, you can't do that because you're not good at things, so you go fishing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like you said, farms are a lot of work. Fuck that. I'm fishing.
It was funny. My brother had a whole totally automated farm after a week of playing that game, where it was like your crops came to you on conveyor belts. And I was like, well, I caught an octopus.
Yeah, you and me are the guy that the villagers knows. And they're like, oh, here comes
fucking
Steve.
idiot.
He's the one.
Yeah.
He's the one that gives everybody fish for presents, like every time.
Oh, you're gonna love it. It's halibut again. The next day, he went to the museum again and looked at the picture. He tried to remember if he had ever been in a barn. Had it been raining, and had he stared out a window at the lightning? He remembered. It was on his honeymoon. They had gone for a walk and been caught in the rain, and stayed in a barn until it stopped. There had been a horse down in the stall and mice running in wet straw. So, like, it's the miracle here is you weren't shot. Because they'd be like, who the fuck's in my barn?
Yeah, like it's one thing if you happen across like an abandoned barn or mostly abandoned barn, but it sounds like if there's a horse in it, it's an active.
You're lucky the
barn.
horse didn't shoot you.
Right.
Because they'll defend what's theirs. But what did it mean? There was no reason to remember it now. That night he was...
She's dead. Fuck it.
She's
I don't want to remember her.
Yeah, I fucking hate memories. I love the museum.
And concerts.
Yeah. That night he was afraid to go to bed. He put it off. At last, when his eyes would not stay open, he lay down fully dressed and left the window closed. Like, you're going to outrun the dream if it comes? Like, why stay fully dressed?
If I end up in this barn again and they catch me, I don't want to be in my pajamas. And why leave the window closed? Because we've already determined that it's too hot when it's closed and that the window being open or closed has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, you're overheating and your body is subconsciously telling you need to cool off.
Yeah.
He didn't use a blanket. He slept heavily and there was no dream. Toward early morning, he woke up. It was just getting light. Without thinking, he pulled a blanket off the chair and threw it over himself. There was no weight. He was suddenly in the barn. There was no sound. It was not raining. There was a gray light in the window. Could it be that it was also morning in his imaginary barn? He smiled drowsily. It was all too charming. He would have to try it in the afternoon to see if the barn were fully lighted. He started to pull the blanket off his head when there was a rustle by his side. He caught his breath. His heart seemed to stop, and there was a tingling in his scalp.
It was the horse.
Yeah.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
It slaps your ass. Oh, man. I really went too far. A soft sigh reached his ears. Something warm and moist brushed over his hand. With a scream, he flung off the blanket and jumped onto the floor. He stood there, staring at the bed and clutching the blanket in his hands, his heart struck with gigantic beats. He sank down weakly on the bed. The sun was just rising. For a week, he slept sitting up in a chair. At last, he had to have a good night's rest and lay down on the bed, fully dressed. He would never use a blanket again. Sleep came, dreamless and black. He didn't know what time it was when he woke up. A sob caught in his throat. He was in the barn again. Lightning flashed in the window and rain was pounding on the roof. He felt around in dread, but there was no blanket anywhere. His hands slapped at the air frenziedly. Suddenly he looked at the window. If he could open it, he might escape. He stretched out his hand as far as he could. Closer, closer. He was almost there. Another inch, and his fingers would touch it. John. A sudden reflex made his hand plunge through the glass. He felt the rain spattering across the back of his hand, and his wrist burned terribly. He jerked back his hand and stared in terror at where the voice had come from. Something white stirred at his side, and a warm hand caressed his arm. "John," came the murmur. "John." He couldn't speak. He reached around, clutching agonizingly for his blanket, but only the breeze blew over his fingers. There was a cold wooden floor under him. He whimpered in fright. His name was spoken again. Then the lightning flashed, and he saw his wife lying by him, smiling at him. That bitch.
Oh, my God. That's terrible.
She's happy to see me, that bitch. Suddenly, the edge of the blanket was in his hand, and pulling it down, he rolled off the bed onto the floor. Something was running across his wrist. There was a dull ache in his arm. He stood up and put on the light. The bright glare filled the room. He saw his arm covered with blood. He picked a piece of glass from his wrist and dropped it on the floor in horror. On his lower arm, the prints of her fingers were red. He tore the sheet from the bed and ran down the hall to the bathroom. He washed the blood off and poured iodine into the thick gash and bandaged it. The burning made him dizzy. Drops of cold sweat ran into his eyes. One of the boarders came in. John told him he had cut himself accidentally. When the man saw the blood running, he ran and called a doctor on the telephone, because he's a snitch.
I like that it specifies... I
grabbed him with my bloody hand and been like, you keep your fucking mouth shut about all this.
I like that it specifies that he ran and called the doctor on the telephone. Otherwise, I thought like maybe he would have called him on the toaster.
I got him in a Discord. He'll be here quick. John sat on the edge of the bathtub and watched his blood dripping on the tiles. The next day, the cut was cleaned and bandaged. The doctor was dubious about the explanation. John told him he did it with a knife, but there was no knife to be found. Not really the doctor's
Who's this fucking
purview.
Doctor thinking? Right.
Yeah. You don't mind if I conduct a little investigation, do you?
Yeah. The nurse, what's wrong, doctor? The doctor, I searched all over that apartment. I didn't find a single knife.
He was told to stay in his room and keep his arms still. This is like, they're like one guy who's a doctor and the cop and the firefighter, and he does all these jobs. Where the fuck did this authority come from? And
the weirdest part is it's the horse from the barn.
Yeah.
Like,
he read most of the day and thought about how he had cut himself on a dream. The thought of her excited him. She was still beautiful. Memories became vivid.
Didn't seem to excite him. He screamed and tried to dive head first out a window.
You never punched your hand through a window because somebody was so hot.
It's like the wolf from the old Looney Tunes movies. Ooga.
That's the appropriate reaction to a beautiful woman. Memories became vivid. They had lain in each other's arms in the straw and listened to the rain. He couldn't remember what they'd said. He was not afraid she was coming back. His outlook on life was realistic. She was dead and buried. It was some aberration of the mind, some mental climax that had put itself off until now. Then he looked at his wrist and saw the bandage. It hadn't been her fault, though. She didn't ask him to crash his hand through the glass. So that's very reasonable of you to look back on it and be actually, you didn't make me do that, honey.
I'm just an idiot.
You said my name, and I was like, I have to die.
Not even that. It's like he didn't try to climb out the window. He's just like, I have to put my arm through this window right now.
Yeah. He reacts to his name being called the way I react to Elden Ring bosses, where I'm like, just damn it. What? Perhaps he could be with her in one existence and have her money in another. Now you're thinking like a 21st century man.
Well, but if you actually loved each other, didn't you have her money while she was alive?
Shut up.
Or is she just that stingy with it?
Not enough money for 2 museum tickets. Yeah.
Well, that's true. I'm not a big concert person. A part of that those are expensive.
Maybe we can't go every day, she said, and I looked at her with rage in my eyes.
I shoved her through a window.
I shoved her through a barn. It didn't kill her, but it kind of knocked her over, and she got mad and left. Something held him from it. It had been frightening. The wet straw in the darkness, the mice in the rain, the bone-stiffening chill. He made up his mind what he would do. That night, he turned out the lights early. He got on his knees beside the bed. He put his head under the covers. If anything went wrong, he had only to pull away quickly. He waited. Soon he smelled
I hope he's a floating head in the barn. Like,
just
his wife screams, "John, you've been decapitated."
Soon he smelled the straw and heard the rain and looked for her. He called her name softly. There was a rustling. A warm hand caressed his cheek. He started at first, then he smiled. Her face appeared and she put her cheek against his. The perfume of her hair intoxicated him. Words filled his mind. "John, we are always one. Promise? Never part? If one of us dies, the other will wait. If I die, you'll wait, and I'll find a way to come to you. I'll come to you and take you with me. And now I have gone. You made me that drink, and I died. And you opened the window so the breeze would come in, and now I am back." He began to shake. Her voice became harsher. He could hear her teeth grinding. Her breath was faster. Her fingers touched his face. They ran through his hair and fondled his neck. He began to moan. He asked her to let go. There was no answer. She breathed faster still. He tried to pull away. He felt the floor of his room with his feet. He tried hard to pull his head from under the blanket, but her grasp was very strong. She began to kiss his lips. Her mouth was cold, her eyes wide open. He stared into them while her breath mingled with his. Then she threw back her head, and she was laughing, and lightning was bursting through the window. Rain was thundering on the roof, and the mice shrieked, and the horse stamped, and made the barn shake. Her fingers clenched on his neck. He pulled with all his might, and gritted his teeth, and wrenched from her grasp. There was a sudden pain, and he rolled across the floor. When the landlady came in 2 days later to clean, he was in the same position. His arms were sprawled in the dried puddle of blood, and his body was taut and cold. His head was not to be found. So you fucking called it. Fucking, that is the dumbest plan. If you're ever being transported somewhere to like,
yeah, don't put your head in.
Don't go half in to the portal. You know? Yeah,
especially not your head. Yeah. Like, because that's
need that.
Asking, right?
It turns out you need that. Yeah. The rules aren't very consistent though, because he was above the blanket and kept having the dream too. So I don't know why going under the blanket with his head, like, would his head have popped off anyway? I don't know.
Probably. It kind of sounds like he murdered her because she said, "You made me the drink and then I died."
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's implied with, like, all the shit about, like, well, I needed her money, you know?
Yeah, but then it's weird that he's, like, excited to see her and it's going to go ahead first. Like, I don't know. But it doesn't
explain. Honey, I love you, but I love concert money more.
But it's like, I love you, but I love your money so that I can live a modest life that you'd probably let me live anyway, because he wasn't doing anything wild.
Yeah.
He was.
So here's the slight twist on that. It was probably picked up on. You actually pointed something out that would tip our listeners off. That wasn't a creepypasta. That was a story by Richard Matheson, who is one of my favorite horror authors. He wrote Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, I Am Legend. We talked about it before, about like doing, like we kind of joked about like doing Edgar Allan Poe and shit on here.
And seeing if you could tell the difference between that and a creepypasta.
And I gotta tell you,
I could not.
I gotta tell you, there are elements to that are very creepypasta. It's not to prove anything about the quality of the writing. It's to prove that me and Steve are assholes and can make fun of anything.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that that's the same guy that wrote the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. 'Cause I love that too. That was one of the
this
classic,
is actually from the collection called Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
20,000 Feet. See, and I know that one kind of gets almost made fun of as a cliche because it's referenced so much, but right. I mean, it's such a good, little, story, you know, Twilight Zone thing.
Twilight Zone nailed it. Twilight Zone made it like hilarious and scary because that monster is just a dude in a dumb, like, Bigfoot costume. And he, like, electric slides onto the wing. And it's amazing. It's so fucking funny. And at the same time, if that thing was right at your passenger window, you would shit your pants.
Well, the brilliance of that episode is that, or that story, is that it taps into it's not so much the fear of this ridiculous fucking monster, although it's literally trying to kill them, but it's more that fear that something really bad's going on, but nobody will listen to you. That's really the fear that one taps into, because I think we've all been not there necessarily to like the point of life and death and nobody's listening to you, but I think we've all had that experience where like something's going down or you're trying to say something and just nobody will fucking like, they're like, yeah, whatever, or they're just completely blowing it off.
Yeah.
So that's what's so brilliant about that story in my mind. But this one I have a hard time picturing in the same category because I didn't hate it.
It's definitely one of the weaker stories in the collection. I do like it, but it's also I kind of had to think about time constraints, so some stories are pretty long. But I do like that one for just like because it has that creepypasta like random escalation at the end, where it's just like, okay, you kind of just like decided, fuck it, I know the ending, let's get to it. His head pops off.
It was interesting that it was like the guy kept freaking out, but it was like, yeah, she just seemed to be like there and she didn't seem hostile. He's like, okay. I'll go back one more time. She's like, oh, I'm going to rip your head off.
Yeah.
Asshole.
Yeah.
And
I love you.
Yeah.
I thought that would be a fun
Now it just kind of
twist.
makes me want to fall asleep to a thunderstorm though. And
yeah, I got to do that last night. It was awesome.
We had a couple last week, and one of them, they almost never mesh up with like the time you're trying to go to sleep. And then when they do, those ones tend to be the like, oh yeah, your whole fucking state's under a tornado warning. And so you're not like, oh, this is relaxing. You're like, well, shit, I hope we don't die.
Yeah.
But we did have a nice like evening thunderstorm last week, but now we're back in that toggle, the spring toggle where it was like 70 or not quite 70, but close to 70 for the last week. And then it's going to like snow tomorrow, like nothing accumulation wise, but like all weekend it's like, oh yeah, high is back down in like the 30s. And you're like, son of a bitch. No thunderstorms for me. Although over the last few years, we started getting more of those like winter storms, where you get like a cold thunderstorm.
Yeah.
And those are always kind of neat to me just because they're so like different.
Yeah. They're interesting, but
that's neither here nor there.
I hate being cold. Unless it's in a barn with my lovely wife who I murdered.
And she's going to murder me back.
Yeah. I don't know. What happens after that? All right, we killed each other. Call it square? Like,
well, yeah.
You two just hang out in the barn forever?
She said, oh, you said we'd be together forever. So it's like she wants to kill him, but then they'll be stuck together. Yeah, like you said, and it's like, well, I don't know. That's almost a very Twilight Zone-y ending because now he's stuck with her in a barn and it's like, well, I didn't really hate you. I just wanted your money, but now I'm dead, so I don't need your money. So
now neither one of us can go to the museum, you bitch. Way to be real mature. No, I mean, there are couples who are that fucking toxic and committed to their toxicity. Yeah. So I guess, eternally hating each other in a barn.
Well, and again, it doesn't even seem like hate. It's that weird, like, love-hate or hate-love.
Like,
neither of them seemed overtly hostile to the others, despite him apparently murdering her and her murdering him back.
Yeah.
But, like, yeah, it wasn't like
It was just like blue-balled. He couldn't pick up any girls at the concerts or museum. Yeah. So after a while, I was like, I miss my wife. It's like, well, you shouldn't have killed her, idiot.
Maybe if I stick my head in this thing.
Maybe if I just... He puts something else under the covers, that gets pulled off. Imagine that.
You know what I like to picture? That doctor that was like, yeah, I don't trust that knife story at all. he also got called because he's also the coroner. And he walks in and sees a decapitated body laying there, and he goes, I knew it. Yeah. Suicide.
I still don't think a knife was involved. Staring at a decapitated head.
Something's fishy here. Can't put my finger on it.
But yeah, so yeah, that's the story. And
I liked it. And I completely forgot that suggestion earlier about like creepypasta or not creepypasta or whatever. So I'm glad you like came in swinging with that, because I really 100% bought into like that being
from a user named Math Kid.
Yeah.
That was such a dumb like when I come up with a lie, I have to like keep adding to it. I can't just let a lie sit. I have to add stupid details. So I'm like a fucking poor man's Riddler.
I know, because how easy would it have been? Because 90% of the ones we do were like, oh, this one's not a credit. You know, this one's
I didn't even change the name of the story. Like I just said it was from a guy named Math Kid. Because I'm the puppet master. Benny Cool Dick, master manipulator.
You've been cool dicked.
Yeah. And you'll be cool dicked again next week when we have other shit. Thanks for listening. Ta-ta for now.